This bloodbath is the end for Chinese EV makers. If you thought EVs are the future, you better think again because China is going through the worst time period of their EV industry. From the involvement of the government to the expensive repair parts that have caused this multi-billion-dollar industry to collapse. Manufacturers are double-minded now on whether to continue or not. Everyone is looking towards the government to bring in a miracle from the sky and change their horrible life. But the path towards a greener and more electrifying life looks to be very slim. The fight between rivals to sell the most EVs is slowly dying, and dealerships are being filled up like an EV graveyard. What is the root cause for all this? Why are things moving downhill all of a sudden? Let's find out. The situation for Chinese electric vehicle makers isn't looking good these days. Their industry is going through a rough patch, and it's part of a bigger problem with China's economy. After many years of doing really well, things have slowed down. More people are out of work, and the population is getting older. This means folks aren't spending as much money as they used to, which is worrying for the government, especially since the housing market isn't doing well either. For a long time, buying property was a popular way for people to invest their money, but now, that's not an option anymore. The real estate market has been hit hard, and it's causing trouble for other industries too, including EVs. When people don't feel good about the economy, they're less likely to spend money on big things like electric cars. Plus, the competition in the EV market has gotten a lot tougher. It used to be dominated by a few big players, but now there are a lot more companies fighting for customers. This means less profit for everyone and more uncertainty about the future. On top of that, there are some technical problems to deal with. Even though China is known for its technology, EV makers are struggling with things like battery performance and charging stations. These issues make it harder for people to switch from regular cars to electric ones. And finally, there are all sorts of rules and regulations to follow. The government keeps changing its mind about subsidies and environmental standards, which makes it hard for EV makers to plan for the future. All in all, it's a tough time to be in the Chinese EV business. Additionally, the government is trying to help by putting more money into the banking system and trying to boost the stock market. But experts from places like Capital Economics aren't feeling very optimistic about the near future. They think China's economy will only grow by about 4% in 2024. While the government's efforts might help a bit, it's going to take a long time for things to get better. Even though there might be some positive changes in the economy, it won't happen right away. The tough times are hitting EV companies hard. Just in the last part of 2023, companies like NIO and XPeng reported huge losses, over $600 million and $500 million respectively. Making a profit is really rare these days, especially with all the competition driving prices down. Li Auto was one of the few companies to make any money, earning $385 million in the third quarter of last year. With the Chinese economy slowing down, it's no surprise that the car market isn't doing so great either. The best year for car sales was back in 2017, when 24 million new vehicles were sold. Last year, it was down to around 21 million. With things looking like this, EV makers are finding it harder and harder to make ends meet. It's pretty safe to say they'll keep losing millions of dollars every year for a while. For most companies, finding a new investor is harder than ever. Let's look at the big Chinese EV names like NIO, Zhang, and Li Auto. They've been losing a lot of their value lately. Some sources say their stocks dropped by 40 to 65% over the last few months. Now let's talk about the price war. With EV growth slowing down and the car market already peaked, many companies are desperate to stay afloat. There are so many manufacturers out there now that even China's huge car market seems too full, especially for EVs, which make up about a third of all cars sold in the world's second largest economy. Population growth has slowed down a lot too, at around 3% per year now. That means there are fewer and fewer new customers, making things even tougher for car makers. So, what do? They start a price war, not just offering little perks like free charging or insurance, but slashing prices by huge amounts. It's like a big fight to see who can survive the longest and come out on top. But right now, everyone's losing a ton of money. Big players like BYD are cutting prices by more than 100%, and others like Li Auto, Zhang, GAC, and SAIC are offering massive discounts too. It's a tough time to be in the car business. Furthermore, it seems like the ongoing price war has dragged foreign players into the fray as well. For decades, the Volkswagen Group has been a dominant force in China, but now, they are even forced to offer huge discounts, especially on Audi models, which are now 50% cheaper than they used to be. BMW is in the same boat, slashing prices to stay competitive. Even Japanese companies like Toyota are getting in on the discount game, offering big markdowns on their vehicles. Now let's talk about BYD. It's the biggest EV company in China, and maybe the only one consistently turning a profit. It's often seen as Tesla's biggest rival, both in terms of technology and sales. But even BYD is feeling the pinch of oversaturation in the domestic market. The problem is, it hasn't made much of a dent in the global market. While it sells some cars in places like Australia and Europe, the numbers aren't great. About 95% of its cars are sold in China, and with the slowdown, it's taking a hit. In February, BYD sold around 50,000 vehicles, a whopping 37% drop compared to the same month last year. Despite offering big discounts, the outlook for the rest of the year isn't much better. It's a tough situation all around. It's no wonder that the stock value has dropped by 23% over the past year. Chairman and Chief Executive Wang Chanfei suggested that the company should buy back shares to boost the stock price. According to the latest reports, the company plans to spend $55.6 million on share buybacks. Now let's move on to how the struggles of big players impact smaller ones. If the biggest companies are having a hard time, you can imagine how tough it is for smaller ones. This market meltdown has hit them even harder. Back in 2017, there were over 500 registered EV makers in China. Today, that number has shrunk to around 90, but even that number might be misleading because many of these remaining companies aren't really doing much. Some manage to sell just 500 vehicles every few months, while others can't even do that. Reports suggest that only 20 companies are operating at 60% or more of their production capacity. This isn't surprising when you realize that the top 10 EV sellers in China control 80% of the market. As for the rest, they're basically on life support. With the ongoing price war, it's inevitable that many of them will end up filing for bankruptcy. It's a grim situation for the smaller players in the industry. Number 1. The bloodbath has finally arrived. We've been warned about the impending crisis in the Chinese EV industry for a while now, and it seems like it's here. Just look at the signs we've talked about in this video. The market is slowing down, stock prices are dropping, and even the biggest players are struggling. Need more evidence? Just look at the recent wave of bankruptcies. In just the past few months, 5 or more EV makers have gone under. And we're not talking about small players here. These were once promising companies like Evergrande New Energy Auto, which was part of one of China's largest conglomerates. Despite massive investments, this EV maker couldn't make a mark in the market. Maybe it was because of technology issues, or maybe it was just a flawed business model. Then there's WM, a startup that started with a respectable $5.3 billion in capital. But even that wasn't enough to build a sustainable business. Instead, the company is pretty much inactive today, despite its efforts to attract new investors. Speaking of investors, let's not forget to mention SAIC. This is a Chinese state-owned company, and it's also facing significant struggles. Moreover, it's also seeking new investors. The fact that a state-owned company is now seeking investors in the private market is quite telling about the state of the Chinese economy. The CEO of Li Auto, one of the leading EV companies, summed up the current situation of the Chinese EV industry quite well. He stated that companies need to come together, or they won't survive. With the domestic market oversaturated, he also emphasized that the government needs to intervene to prevent more bankruptcies. Otherwise, most of the remaining companies will likely go out of business soon, especially with the ongoing price war. The entire Chinese automotive industry is in a state of panic, and it's now up to the government to acknowledge the new reality and take appropriate action. No matter how dreadful the situation may be, there is always a glitter of hope in this dying industry. The Chinese electric vehicle makers are facing some tough times due to a slower economy, fierce competition, technical issues, and changing rules. Despite government efforts, experts remain cautious about the future. Big companies are struggling with falling stock prices, while smaller ones fight to survive in a harsh market. Bankruptcies loom large, urging collective action and government support. The road ahead is uncertain, but with resilience and cooperation, the industry can weather the storm. Thanks for joining us on this journey, and until next time, stay hopeful and stay connected.